Institute, the amount that the world spent on military spending reached very high levels during the Cold War. In 1989, those levels started to go down a little as we apparently benefited from the peace dividend at the end of the Cold War, with two superpowers trying to outspend each other. But they now calculate that we currently are spending as much now as we were spending during the Cold War. So we have Cold War levels of military expenditure, but no Cold War. The principal determinant of that trend is the United States. The United States military expenditure now accounts for roughly half the world's total. And the other big military expenditures, big military powers that come after it are the UK, France, Russia, Japan and China, with roughly 4 to 5% of spending each. The UK, where the UK comes on most lists, varies between about 2nd and 5th, depending on how you calculate the spending. But either way, the UK is significantly the biggest military spender in the EU. Now, of all that military spending, only a tiny part of that is spent on peacekeeping operations. If the United States were to find itself in a position whereby it had, very unlikely position, it had to go to war with its two official enemies, the two remaining countries in the axis of evil, let's imagine that both those countries decided, and it's a very unlikely scenario, both decided to declare war on the United States simultaneously, and that none of the US allies, like South Korea, were around to help. Well, if that happened, the US would outspend both its enemies combined by a ratio of 72 to 1. So it's not close. What has all this spending got to do with defence? That's the name used to describe it, the Ministry of Defence, the Department of Defence in the US. Well, not a great deal. During the Cold War, the line that most people understood was that spending was about deterrence. It was about preparing yourself for a possible attack from the Soviet Union or the Warsaw Pact countries. Now, there is no such logic. The UK and the US have no clear enemies in terms of enemies that might invade. So the spending, if you like, is not really about defence at all. The Ministry of Defence, from that point of view, is something of an Orwellian misnomer. The Ministry of Strategic Intervention would be a better title, but one likely to garner a little less public support. What's so extraordinary is that this shift has occurred without much public debate. A shift away from a rationale that says we have to spend this money in order to defend ourselves, to a rationale that says we need to spend this money in order to be able to intervene globally, is one that has taken place with almost no serious public discussion and no serious debate. In fact, the rationale for spending keeps changing. Now, what is absolutely clear is that there is very little public support for these levels of spending. Various surveys have been done in the UK and Britain about areas of public spending, and those surveys show over and over again that the areas of spending that people want more money spent on are health, education and the environment. In the US, for example, when asked what they would like more money spent on, roughly 70 to 80% say health and education. About 20 to 25% over the last 50 years have said defence or the military. It's not a popular item of spending. But a recent survey was done by the Programme for International Policy Attitudes in the University of Maryland, where they asked Americans, that's 1,000 Americans, they gave them a copy of the military budget, a copy of the total US budget, and said, here's what we currently spend money on. We would like you to reallocate that spending as you wish. You can confirm it if you like, you can put some things up, you can put some things down. This is a representative sample of America. The average response suggested that the average cut made by the American people to their own defence budget was between 31 and 35%. That's $163 billion annually. Now, when you use terms like that, it's often difficult to take it in. $1 million, $1 billion, $100 billion. It just sounds like a lot of money to us. It's very difficult to make meaningful comparisons, but I'll make one in a second. The areas they wanted to increase spending on were job training, energy conservation, and developing renewable energy resources. Now, the official rationale for this is a little unclear. But one of the things that's notable is that any discussion of this volume of spending is very rarely raised as a matter of public debate. It's not an election issue. It's not something that's ever really asked of politicians. You will never see a headline that says, military spending out of control, says report. And yet we get a great deal of discussion about the lack of money being spent on the military. Various vested interests will often make news headlines when they suggest that there are shortfalls in the current level of spending. So the public impression created is not one of massive levels of spending, but of fairly low levels of spending. The rationale for all of that has shifted over the last few years, and it's shifted in a way that suggests that the public rationale is perhaps not all that it would seem. But I suppose post-Cold War, the most obvious rationale used during the 1990s is what you might call a kind of dangerous world syndrome. Okay, we don't have the Soviet Union anymore as an enemy, but it's still a dangerous world. And Saddam Hussein sort of walked into that category very quickly. He wasn't in that category before, of course, as many as you will know. He was a reliable ally, but he became part of that category very quickly. That notion has perhaps best been articulated by George Bush, as he put it in the year 2000, on January 21st. He said, "When I was coming up, it was a dangerous world, and you knew exactly who they were. It was us versus them, and it was clear who them was. Today, we are not so sure who they are, but we know they're there." I guess that's kind of an example of, well, I was going to say it's kind of an example of what Donald Rumsfeld called known unknowns, but actually it's more unknown known. Get your head around that. However, this is not something which you can blame on George Bush. Defence spending began to increase significantly under President Clinton during the late 1990s. Okay. Now, it's a key thing to talk about just because the levels of money are so vast. These are vast sections of our resources, the US resources, and other parts of the world's resources that could be spent on other things. And let me give you just a quick shopping list to end with. The amount calculated to do a number of things in terms of the Millennium Goals are as follows. It would cost $19 billion annually to eliminate starvation and malnutrition globally. It will cost $12 billion annually to provide education for every child on Earth. It will cost $15 billion annually to provide safe water and sanitation to every person on the planet. It would cost $23 billion annually to reverse the spread of AIDS and malaria. You could do all those things for $69 billion a year. That's 11% of the current defence budget, which is only a third of the cut that most American people actually favour. That's why this is such a significant political issue, and it's why one I think we need to spend more time talking about. Thank you.